Hey guys, welcome to the review. So I saw a bunch of different stuff. I'm mainly gonna use this video to focus on the Batman and Diabolical, but I did also watch Free Guy and West Side Story, which came out some time ago, so I'm just gonna give quick thoughts on those. If you are interested, you can skip in the time code in the description and check out my thoughts on the Batman and Diabolical. So I saw Free Guy finally. I didn't really have much interest in seeing it in the theater, and my brother did, and I was like, nah, I'm just gonna wait for it to show up on Disney Plus, which is what I did, and I'm very glad I did because I didn't love it, but I did think it was a lot of fun. Not something I would pay to go see in the theater though. Yeah, it's very fun. It's not a masterpiece or anything. People have been comparing it to The Truman Show, and I'd also say it's sort of a toned back version of Ready Player One without all of the fan service. There is some fan service, and yeah, it was enjoyable. I liked it. I like Ryan Reynolds. Sometimes it can be kind of annoying how clever it seems he thinks he is, but he's just doing his thing. He's being quippy and saying his lines the way he says all of his lines. There's a thing in the story about how Guy and one of the developers of the original layout of the game have a lot in common, and I guessed immediately why it was that they have so much in common. And yeah, I mean, the movie goes into sort of a combination of like GTA and Fortnite, from what I understand. I don't really know anything about Fortnite. And then there's the cameos from one actor cameo that's very funny. And then there's the cameos from a bunch of gamers that I only mildly know through my brother when he used to watch gaming stuff. Aside from that, I don't really know anything about them. So yeah, it was a bit weird to see them have such a high status for a second in a big movie, but it makes sense. So yeah, Free Guy was fun. That's all I really have to say about it. So I saw West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg, on HBO Max, and gotta admit it here, I've never seen the original West Side Story. I've never seen any version of West Side Story. All I know is that it's Romeo and Juliet. And this movie, even though I don't really like the songs in this kind of musical, except one or two, I really enjoyed this movie, and the main reason for that, and I keep saying this to people that I know, this movie is so juicy. From a directing perspective, it's insanely juicy, and you can see how much Spielberg cares about each shot and how he plans it so meticulously. I remember when the Blu-rays for Indiana Jones came out, Spielberg was talking about how he always wanted to direct musicals, which is why at the beginning of the second Indiana Jones film, Temple of Doom, it starts off with a musical number. So it's cool that he's finally doing this. I don't know that he's directed any other musicals. And yeah, again, I keep saying it, this is my word choice, it's juicy. It's the film is just oozing with style and such a beautiful look to it. If my review was on the box, it would just say juicy. That's all I would say. Just juicy. West Side Story is juicy. It's so good. The story is fine, and it's weird because I never really found myself getting really touched or emotional by a musical, but this one got me a few times. I was just like, oh wow, I'm actually really feeling something deep, and the fact that they're breaking out into song isn't pulling me out of it, so that was pretty cool. Yeah, West Side Story, also very good. So I'm going to go into Diabolical first because I'd like to save the Batman for the end. If you don't know, Diabolical is an animated anthology spin-off of the TV show The Boys, a show that I love. And basically what they're doing here is they're giving a bunch of different writers and artists different episodes to do. So each episode is a different writing style and art style. And it's really cool to just see all these different voices get involved. A lot of celebrities are voicing the characters and are writing the episodes, so that's really great. So I'm just going to go through them. The first one was Laser Baby's Day Out, and this is in the style of a traditional Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry cartoon. There's no dialogue, it's all just musical stings and stuff like that. And it was a lot of fun. It's weird seeing this weird, cute little cartoon like Warner Brothers style, that's all folks kind of animation with people getting murdered. There's basically this scientist, and there's a baby that can shoot lasers from its eyes, and the scientist is trying to help it out, and the baby just starts lasering people in half and just making a giant bloody mess. That episode was a lot of fun. Then the next episode is probably my favorite episode, which is the one written by Justin Roiland, and it's in the Rick and Morty animation style. It's also written by another writer, which I'm really glad about, because I've seen Solar Opposites and I'm not really a big fan of it. I think when Justin Roiland is doing something that's more on his own, it can be kind of obnoxious and hard to watch, but when he was writing with someone else, it kind of creates a center. And this episode, it wasn't like Solar Opposites, it was more like Rick and Morty. It really felt fun, and it felt like it felt focused. And Christian Slater does the voice of this narrating baby, and basically the plot of the episode is that it's a bunch of soups that are put into like an institution, basically, and they find out that Compound V is what is giving people superpowers and that heroes aren't born. And then they realize that their parents, the reason that they're in this facility is because their parents left them there because they all had useless powers. And you get to know everyone, and everyone's powers are awful. There's one guy who just has like boob face, and there's a guy who can turn into any animal, but when he turns into the animal, he also has the mind of the animal, so he's completely useless. There's a guy who's just like who's just like a pool of water, and then there's a guy who talks in slow motion. Everyone's just fucking useless, and it's really funny. There's one dude that can just locate paper, like any specific piece of paper. So they're all a bunch of useless superpowered people, soups, and then they go on a revenge quest to kill all of their parents for abandoning them after giving them their powers that were, fucking awful. So yeah, that was my favorite episode. Then there's an episode that is written and directed by Garth Ennis and someone else. And Garth Ennis, or Ennis, I'm not sure how to say it, is the creator of the Boys comic. So it's in the style of the comic book, and everyone is drawn to look like how they do in the comics, including Huey, who is drawn to look like Simon Pegg. So it's really cool because they got Simon Pegg to voice Huey. He does a Scottish accent, which is interesting. I didn't know that was ever the intention of, the Huey character in the comics. So it was cool. It felt like an unofficial one-off episode or one-off issue of what the original series must have been. And basically it follows Butcher trying to get a guy who does drug deals for soups to get a soup really high to get him to kill himself or something like that. I'm kind of blanking a little bit. But yeah, and that soup is voiced by Michael Cera, which is a lot of fun. Then there's an episode with this version of Compound V that Kumail Nanjiani's character, who's a scientist, gives to people, and it's sort of like a gel that makes your face look more attractive, and if like based off whatever you think. And there's this guy who's interested in this girl who lives in his building, and he uses it to try to make himself more attractive. She also uses it, and then she looks like a cat person, like she's got like a cat filter face, and she's basically like a furry, and they become a new like celebrity couple, basically. Like everyone loves it, and it's just so bizarre and very much in the style of the Boys. And then we sort of see how that spirals out and becomes a disaster. That one was a lot of fun. Then there's the one of these two soups that end up becoming a couple, and it seems like they're crazy in love after stopping the supervillain, who is voiced by John DiMaggio, who voices Bender on Futurama and Jake on Adventure Time. So then they have a daughter, and they are arguing constantly. Their marriage is awful. They're gonna get a divorce. So the daughter reaches out to the supervillain, and she's like, hey, can you like cause some damage so maybe my parents can fight you and fall in love again? And that dynamic and that concept was already so great. That was one of my favorite episodes. Then there's one that's really sad with this old Asian couple, and one of them's dying. I thought this was a bit much in terms of how sad it was. I feel like the Boys can be sad, but I like the dark comedy aspect of it. And I mean, I admire this one for trying to be different, but this one was probably my least favorite episode because it was like, man, this is just really sad. It's not like sexual and fucked up. Like I love, that kind of content from the Boys. So yeah, that one was just really sad. Just really sad. And then there's one that's sort of a Homelander prequel that feels like one of the only ones that can actually be canon to the show. And we see how Homelander was kind of an okay dude. And we see some of his childhood trauma and how that affects him, and we see him slowly become closer to the Homelander that he is when we meet him on the show. That one actually feels like one of the only ones that can be canon in this series, and that was a lot of fun. There's this really funny part where Homelander's gonna attack Black Noir, and Black Noir like puts his hands out and shakes his head. It's more like you gotta watch it, but to know why it's funny. But my brother and I laughed really hard during that scene. So yeah, that was sort of Diabolical in a nutshell. I did really enjoy it. I recommend you watch it. It was a lot of fun. So now my thoughts on the Batman. So I saw the Batman opening night, and don't kill me yet. I got an explanation and a change of heart going on here. I liked it and I didn't love it. And I have two big reasons for that. Without spoiling it, I'll get into spoilers later, but now it's spoiler free. The first one being the portrayal of Bruce Wayne, and the second one being Riddler's plan. Those were my two biggest problems. Now only one of those things is a problem, because a little bit later I watched it again because everyone was like, "Oh my god, I love this movie, it's so good." And I was like, "All right, I got to like just leave my reservations at the door, clear head, just watch it again." And it was much better the second time. One of those problems sort of disappeared. And it's weird because I did have high expectations for the movie, but what it was not based off of how I wanted specific things to go. Because the director, Matt Reeves, has done the last two Planet of the Apes movies, and those movies are spectacular. And I would say they're easily better than the Batman, his last two Planet of the Apes films. So I was sort of just thinking, okay, the director of the last two Planet of the Apes movies is making a Batman movie. That's going to be spectacular. And that's basically where my expectations stopped. It was just the director and the plot, being a Batman film. So it didn't really meet those basic expectations that I thought it would. Not based off of like, oh, I mean, I wish Riddler did this, or I wish Alfred was more like that. Just the basic, oh, I know what this director is capable of. Which is sort of what my criticism with the Suicide Squad was. Because I was like, okay, James Gunn's doing Suicide Squad. I love James Gunn. I love his previous work. But then I went in, I tried to clear up my mind, and one of those problems got fixed, the other one did not. And it's really hard to talk about this movie without going into spoilers, so I'm just going to say it's really good. I liked it. I didn't love it. So before getting into spoilers, just going to go through the list. Batman, Robert Pattinson, really good. His performance is more subtle, and I like that a lot. You can see a lot of the pain on his face, and his performance as Batman is really good. My problems with Batman were more in the writing. I don't really have those problems anymore, and again, I'll get more into that in spoilers. Zoe Kravitz plays Catwoman. She's really good in the film. Sort of what you expect from Catwoman, really. There is a bit of a dynamic that relates to Bruce Wayne that I can't really get into without spoiling it. Gordon, played by Jeffrey Wright, is great. One of my favorite Gordons, him and Gary Oldman are pretty much tied for best Gordon for me. Gary Oldman's gets to be really heroic at points. And I think Gordon could definitely build up to that in future films. My brother was talking about how if you compare Gordon and Just Batman Begins compared to this Gordon is kind of better, and I do agree with that. Then there's Penguin, played by Colin Farrell. Really well by Colin Farrell. The performance is so good, and there's only one moment where I could tell it was him, which is when he's looking at the Batmobile, because he makes a face where it's like, yeah, I've seen Colin Farrell make that face before. But yeah, aside from that, like, you would never know it's him. It's insane. Alfred was good in it, played by Andy Serkis. I feel like he could have been in it more, but it's still good. And also, I think this is the youngest... No, this is definitely the youngest Alfred we've had, because Andy Serkis is in his 50s. So, yeah, really young Alfred. And then there's Riddler, played by Paul Dano. It's Dano, not Dano. My brother and I are big fans of Paul Dano. We've seen him in a bunch of stuff. And we have always been saying Dano. And then a bunch of critics were saying Dano. And it's like, have we been saying it wrong all these years? Because Dano sounds right. And then there were 2 interviews that I saw with him. And then he says Dano, and it's like, yeah, I fucking knew it. Stop saying Dano. It's Paul Dano. All right, so just to, on the record, it's Paul Dano. All right, he's really good as Riddler. I remember they announced him, like, in October of, I want to say 2019 or something, that he was going to be Riddler. And then I immediately texted my brother, because I was like, yes, like, this is some dream casting right here. He did a really good job in the film. Again, I can't really talk about it without going into spoilers. I also really liked the look of Gotham in the movie. A lot of people are saying it's like the Arkham games, which it absolutely is. It's not like the Dark Knight trilogy where it just feels like Chicago. It feels like it's got personality. I think this and Tim Burton's versions of Gotham are easily my favorites. There's something so cool and personality. There's a personality to it, really. So yeah, gonna go into spoilers for a bit. So I really liked Selena Kyle's connection to Bruce Wayne, where Falcone's her dad, and Falcone was the one who potentially made the hit on the Waynes. I liked the Waynes being corrupt. Alfred almost dying was really good. Matt Reeves, before the movie came out, said that Alfred was going to be very concerned about Bruce's mental health in this movie, and that, I don't know, I got the impression that from this movie we were really going to get the idea that, oh yeah, this guy would definitely go out dressed as a bat and beat up people. Like, there is a level of him that's kind of insane and sort of obsessed with this weird crime fighting stuff, where the line between him and the villains would be blurred. And I was hoping for more conversations about that the first time I saw it. And I was like, man, like, Bruce just basically says, "You're not my dad," and that's basically it. And I was talking about how I was talking to my brother about this, how Alfred, he seems more concerned about Bruce's image than his actual mental health. I mean, there's a point where I thought that the first time, and then I watched it again, and he does say that line about how, he's worried, he's scared because Bruce says he doesn't care about what happens to him. And I wanted that to be more of a thread throughout the entire movie, especially with the beginning of the film. He has his whole journal session about how he's like a symbol of vengeance and fear in the city. And the first time I watched it, when he's doing his last journal entry at the end, and he's like, "Oh, I have to be hope for these people," I was like, that's what you learned in this movie, because I really didn't get that impression at all. I feel like that wasn't talked about at all. And then I rewatched the movie, and throughout more of the subtle stuff in it, I did get the impression that he did learn something, and that he went through a journey that was more nonverbal, specifically with the guy in the church at the funeral who ends up being the "I'm vengeance" guy at the end. How Catwoman is like, "Oh, I thought you were vengeance," and then Riddler's like, "No, you inspired me." You have all these elements in the film where Bruce realizes that he's influencing Gotham in a negative way by creating people basically that think they're being versions of him, but obviously much worse. And I think the movie did a really good job of showing that non-verbally, and I didn't really appreciate that the first time, because I still, even though I do like it, I still think that the best version of Bruce Wayne is Christian Bale. And you see how he's the most emotionally complex Bruce Wayne, Christian Bale is. And you have a lot of conversations with him and Alfred, and I feel like throughout not only the entire trilogy, but in each of Christian Bale's movies, you get the sense that he changed and he grew in some sort of way. And I love the conversations he has with Alfred in those movies, with Michael Caine's Alfred. So watching this, I was like, wow, he had 2 conversations with Alfred, and that was it. And I don't know, I thought, based off of this, my expectations were based off of what Matt Reeves said, that Alfred was going to be concerned for Bruce's mental health and that kind of stuff. And I thought we were going to get more conversations about that. And I thought we were going to, what I would have liked to see, and this is me writing the movie, is to see Bruce really just go nuts when it comes to beating the shit out of people, and then for people around him to tell him to slow down, to be like, hey, what the hell, like don't go crazy on this guy. And the only time that happens is when he gives himself an adrenaline rush. It's not out of his own rage and will. So I feel like stuff like that would have better shown the message of the movie, that Bruce is just using this for his own benefit more so than for the helping of the people of Gotham, basically. Like, he's doing it because he's angry, not because it's helping people. Like, I love in The Dark Knight when you see Christian Bale's back and it's so messed up, and you're like, wow, this guy's really pushing himself to the limit. And I would have loved to, even though I do appreciate it more now, to see even more of Bruce Wayne's self-destructive side, that he's just really pushing himself to the limit. And it's kind of insane, really. I really would have loved to see that. But what they did, I think, also really worked in the film. So that was one of my 2 problems, and it was mostly helped by second viewing. I do think they could have done some stuff better. Basically, seeing Batman be a madman would have been really entertaining, and for him to realize this is not why I should be doing this. So then there's the Riddler, which is, I mean, here's the thing. I love everything about the Riddler up to a certain point. And this was really my biggest problem with the movie, and a problem that I've talked to people about, and it's sort of helped, but it really hasn't changed too much for me. And that's the fact that, to me, Riddler's plan still doesn't really make any sense, in that it seems he genuinely believes that the elite are lying to the people of Gotham, and he genuinely believes, like Batman, he's helping them and helping them be aware of the situation, and that like himself, who was an orphan, is being mistreated basically by the elite. So that makes sense to me, right? I get all of that. But what doesn't make any sense to me is he's telling the people of Gotham, oh, the elite are lying to you. Not just you, but the elite are lying to us, to me. I was an orphan. I was living in a shithole as a kid. The Waynes were supposed to help me, but they didn't do anything. And then he decides to flood all of Gotham, which makes no fucking sense. Please, if you have the answer to this, if you have a good explanation to this, please tell me. Because I don't get why he's standing up for the little guy, and then he's like, oh, and now I'm gonna drown you. Gotham, the elite are lying to you, and then now I'm gonna drown all of you. Does that make any sense to anyone? Because it makes no sense to me. And my brother started talking about how it would have been more interesting if maybe Batman's obsession with the riddles was his downfall, and Riddler was using them to distract Batman from something more significant, and for it to be a more personal battle between Riddler and Batman, for Riddler to actually be involved in the climax. So yeah, I don't get why Riddler's trying to help the poor of Gotham, and if he's just gonna drown them, it doesn't make any sense. Because it seemed like he genuinely believed what he was saying, especially when you think of his conversation with Bruce in prison with Batman. And I mean, I did really enjoy the fact that, you know, it seemed like he figured out that Bruce was Batman, but it turned out he didn't. But at the same time, I think it would have been really cool if he did, and he just kept it a secret, because that's sort of like another riddle, and it's like, why would you give the answer to that to so many other people? And, you know, the duality between both of them being orphans, and it's also interesting that and also the idea that he's like, well, you know, you were an orphan, or no, Bruce Wayne was an orphan, but they gave a shit about him because, you know, he was the poor, you know, not poor, but like, oh, like poor little boy who was a rich kid. And then they didn't give a shit about any of the other orphans that were supposed to get help from the Wayne Foundation. So that was really cool too. And then Joker shows up at the end, and it's like, okay, we currently have 3 Jokers now. We got this one, we got Jared Leto and Joaquin Phoenix, because the main DC universe is still going, so Jared Leto's still Joker. Joaquin Phoenix is apparently getting a sequel, and then we got this Joker now, so whatever. It's just a Joker palooza. I feel like you didn't need that in the movie, but it's fine, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I'm still very frustrated by Riddler's plan, because it genuinely makes no sense. It made sense until he decided to come after all of Gotham instead of the elite. And I feel like they wanted to have a big finale. My brother and I were saying it was too much like Batman Begins. Just the hysteria of it all. I would have preferred if maybe there were a bunch of Gotham elite officials, and then Riddler was gonna go out and have them all assassinated at the same time. And you could have it in like 7 different locations or whatever the hell, to make it more interesting for Batman. If his target is still the same thing, that works for me. But for Riddler to switch from the elite to all of Gotham, it makes no sense to me. And I feel like, I don't know, they just wanted a big finale without actually thinking about what was logical in the story and to Riddler's motivations specifically. I did think the riddles were very clever, and the Batmobile was cool, which is funny because I didn't like the look of it before, but it was treated in a cool way in the film. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Batman. I like it. I don't love it. I think it's really good. Riddler's plan makes absolutely no sense. If you have any reason as to why you think Riddler's plan makes sense, I'd love to be convinced. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. I'll have another review sometime soon. Next month, Morbius and Fantastic Beasts 3 come out, so I'll be reviewing those. Yeah, thanks so much for listening. See ya.